I mean, sure. I think it's really important to use completely plain language to make clear what the concepts are that we're talking about. When we're talking about Israel annexing parts of the West Bank, we are talking about land theft, pure and simple. It is categorically illegal under international law. Israel has no claim to the West Bank any more than Israel has claim to Italy or France. I mean, this is just entirely preposterous, and that's why there's an entire mountain of UN resolutions saying that Israel cannot annex the West Bank, that Israel is obligated to withdraw from the occupied territories. And this is why there was universal condemnation of any move towards annexation, with the exception of the Trump administration. And I think it's because Trump probably has about as much respect for international law or any sense of basic decency as Netanyahu does. And so they found a match in each other, and I think this is the reason why annexation is about to move forward. But we should be clear also about the fact that annexation is a de facto reality on the ground. Israel has been grabbing the West Bank and taking up huge chunks of it for a very long time. And we're only talking about Israel merely declaring annexation as de jure for what is already a de facto reality on the ground. And it puts an end to the pretense that Israel is interested in a peace deal with the Palestinians and makes real the prospect of permanent apartheid, where Palestinians are locked down by Israel from every direction, living in complete and total subjugation under Israeli rule, and lacking the rights that other Israelis get to enjoy. And really, we should just be honest about what that arrangement actually is.
Mitchell, land theft, apartheid, your thoughts?
No, I mean, he always comes up with these great sound bites and these great accusations. But, you know, to the best of my recollection, I haven't read it in more than 20 years, but the Oslo Accords actually created a cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. It transferred certain responsibilities, administrative responsibilities. I believe that 96% of the Palestinian population in the West Bank is under the Palestinian Authority for health services, education service, security services, and so forth. And I think even somewhere in the Oslo Accord, it does say that Israel does have a connection to the West Bank. I mean, you know, besides the fact that for thousands of years we've been living in the region, it's, you know, mentioned many times in our Bible. But, you know, I haven't seen Italy in our Bible, but, you know, Omar didn't stop them from saying we have no connection whatsoever, as if we have, you know, no connection to
Mitchell,
Italy as well. So
Mitchell, I just want to be
clear.
I just want to be clear about something.
Somewhat
I'm not
of
saying
a silly
no connection,
debate
no
of land theft, and you just said it. You said no connection to as much as to Italy.
That's not what I said. Let me repeat what I said. Mitchell, allow me to clarify. I don't want you to put words in my mouth. Allow me to clarify what I'm trying to say for a second. I'm saying there is obviously in the same way.
I heard what you said.
Allow me to clarify. Well, clearly you have not, since you're putting words in my mouth. In the same way that there's clearly a Muslim connection to Jerusalem and there's a Christian connection to Jerusalem, those don't mean that Saudi Arabia can take Jerusalem and claim it as a Saudi city, or the Vatican can claim Jerusalem as a Vatican city. In the same sense, there is no question that there is a very deep, meaningful Jewish connection to the West Bank, but that doesn't change the fact that international law says this is Palestinian land that Israel has no political authority to claim, and those are very different things.
But wait a second, in early I know he just took my, I mean, but in 1967, I don't think it was considered Palestinian land. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was Jordanian. So it's nice that the Palestinians have worked in there. It just becomes a silly conversation because there are agreements that talk about the status of it. There are agreements and security cooperation, and that the fact that the two sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis, agreed in the Oslo Accords to start negotiations to discuss what would be the future of it, which includes settlements and it includes other places and some facts on the ground or some places that are there. So, you know, to ignore that and use terms like apartheid and land theft and things like that, it's a very silly way to present your argument.
We're going to have to move on because we could get bogged down on this for quite a while. So let me
clarified it by, you know.
Okay. Mitchell, I think you made your point, and Omar, we've heard from you as well. Dan?
Certainly Israeli democracy, Israeli democratic institutions are eroding. And I think that Netanyahu very deliberately and he's very much aware of what he's doing to get out of this trial, to lead the charge against the Attorney General, the police, and other law enforcement and justice officials and processes is taking the country in a very negative direction that may, God forbid, lead to an outbreak of violence and a slippery slope to an inner conflict which we've not seen the likes of since the establishment of the state. So as much as I would like to see the institutions prevail and the trial reaching an end, and I do hope that he's innocent. He may come out innocent, but I don't know if we'll have that luxury of having this play out till the end. And it's very, very worrisome to see where Israeli society is heading to. The animosity, conflicts, and deep disconnect between various parts of Israeli society that are tearing very, very fabric of it, and I'm worried about that.
And Dan, Gantz has now vowed to protect the judiciary from attack. It's kind of putting him in an awkward position as well. How does he navigate it?
So, he's got a very tough balancing act. On one hand, he's campaigned on Just Not Bibi. Then he joined Netanyahu's government. At the same time, once he's already made that huge leap and is also sharing power with Netanyahu, he does have a very important job in protecting those democratic institutions which I referred to earlier. And so he needs, and he has been doing it, perhaps not forcefully enough, but standing up to the attacks of Netanyahu and his supporters against the democratic institutions, and stating time and time again that rule of law is critical, and Israeli democracy is before anything else, and is above any personal vendetta or personal charges. And so he's got a role to play. He's started to do that, but he's got a lot more to do in the future.
Omar, 18 months can seem like a lifetime in politics, but once Gantz takes the reins as prime minister, do you see him as being more flexible with the Palestinians?
I don't see the prospect of Gantz becoming prime minister after Netanyahu is done as being a particularly positive shift. I mean, he spoke in favor of annexation himself. So it's clear that this unity government is in favor of moving in that direction, and I think that looks inevitable at this point. It's just remarkable to me that when we talk about sort of the threat to Israeli democracy, nobody discusses the elephant in the room. We're talking about what the rhetoric about the rule of law and the courts and this and that. It's almost like talking about what the problems are with U.S. democracy under Jim Crow. I mean, yes, there are Palestinians that are divided in many different categories. Some are citizens of Israel who have some rights, they have some political rights, they can run for the Knesset. You have a portion of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip who can't go in and out of the Gaza Strip without Israel's permission, and it's the same in the West Bank. Even the ones who are living under, Palestinian rule, so to, quote unquote, those are still people who cannot go in and out without Israel's permission. Those are still people whose access to water is denied by Israel. Israel diverts most of the water in the West Bank to the use of settlements. And the list goes on and on. And I think that if we're going to be honest about what is wrong with Israeli democracy, it is the fundamental issue that Palestinians exist on the same land. They do not enjoy the same rights and freedoms that Israelis enjoy. They cannot come in and out. They don't have the same freedom of movement that Israelis enjoy. And until that is fixed, no one can speak in any seriousness about the prospect of Israeli democracy. Democracy depends on the principle of one person, one vote, or a separate state entirely. And as long as Palestinians are denied a state of their own that is viable, that has its own borders and controls its own borders, and at the same time they're denied equal rights, we're living in a situation that I really don't think can even be described as a democracy at all.
Well, Amatza, you brought up this issue. How would you respond to what Omar just said?
Well, I have one question to Omar. If one man, one vote is so important, and what do you say about Mahmoud Abbas's failure to hold his own presidential election and since 2005?
Yeah, I think that's a real problem, and Mahmoud Abbas should be holding elections, but that in no way absolves Israel from continuing the occupation.
Isn't that the real problem then? I'm happy to hear you concede this. Isn't that the real problem?
It's not the real problem because Israel holds control over those territories, a lot more control than Abbas does. If Abbas goes away, the situation of Palestinians, the occupation doesn't end. But if the occupation ends, then sure, the situation in Palestine would look very, very different. And that's really at the bottom. The bottom line is Israel holds the control.
I'm not very happy that you're putting it this way because, Omar, let me help you. I'm happy you're making this distinction between the situation of the national conflict, what you call control, on the one hand, and democracy on the other. Don't confuse democracy with your real agenda, which is legitimate, which is about the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. On the democratic issue, you cannot win. Set that aside. Now concerning control, I actually want to say something in your favor. You can't set it aside when Israel's moving forward with annexation. Okay?
How can you set it aside when Israel's moving forward with permanent hold of the West Bank?
I heard you out. Please hear me out. Listen to me carefully.
Okay.
The annexation idea, as Netanyahu is now promoting it, is very wrongly, in my view, seen by him as a continuation of what he's already done on the Golan Heights. And the Golan Heights, with American backing, he moved ahead with annexation, and it happened from the Israeli viewpoint flawlessly. And he thinks he can use that momentum by proceeding from there to the West Bank. I actually disagree with that calculation of his. And I think that in this roadmap of his, he's failing to consider the fact that the Golan Heights are devoid of any Palestinian population. There are some Syrian Druze over there, but they're not Palestinian. And the regional circumstances were that the local power that be, namely the Syrian government, was up to its neck in its own civil war. The timing, therefore, was also opportune. And the Russians who were in the neighborhood were also evidently quite fine with this. So that worked well for him on the Golan Heights.
All right. So
in West Bank, I think the situation is entirely different.
But
and
that's
that
the thing,
game plan won't work.
I think the problem is that you're looking at it purely through a strategic lens of whether this would be a good move or a bad move. When I think there's a deeper principle at work, which is the Golan Heights is Syrian territory that Israel is not entitled to take, and is the same with the West Bank. Leave the political calculus aside on whether this is a good move or a bad move strategically, and just deal with the underlying principle that Israel does not have the right to expand and take over territory that international law says does not belong to Israel.
All right. Gentlemen, we have to move on.